Well, good morning and welcome to our Lam Tech webinar. Cyber resilience is key when it comes to protecting your business. I'm Doug Sokolowski from Lam Tech, and before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping items that we like to review. Everyone is muted, so there's no background noise. There will be a Q&A window that is available for use of any questions or even some comments that you may have. In addition to introducing our guest, I'll also serve as a moderator. We'll also be joined by our general manager, George Love, and also our marketing coordinator, Courtney Hicks. We'll pose the questions or comments to our presenter to ensure that you do get your answer. There'll also be time available after the webinar to ask questions, and we'll either answer them during the webinar or even set up a time to answer your specific questions. Now, there is no poll this morning. We'd like to see your questions or thoughts. Contact information will be provided at the end of the webinar for you to get in touch with us here at Lam Tech. In addition to our live webinar, we'll also provide a link to the recording should you want to review what you learned today or even want to share your knowledge with another person or organization. We'd appreciate that as well. Without further housekeeping items, we'll get officially started today. Again, I'm Doug Sokolowski, the account manager for Lam Tech, and we do a multitude of things for the IT world of your business. Lam Tech aligns IT solutions with your growth initiatives. Our goal overall is to take care of your technology so you can focus on your day-to-day business and stop expanding those issues. To give you a brief overview of the services that we do deliver at Lam Tech, we offer managed services to maintain your security, help desk support, consulting, as well as data recovery and backup services. Now, today, we're going to be discussing as we continue to keep moving forward here in 2022. Our reliance, though, on IT infrastructure continues to grow. And unfortunately, with that, cyber criminals are seizing on the growth. And a recent study showed that small business community has become one of their favorite targets. In order to combat these threats, cyber resiliency is key to keeping your office safe from these attacks. And we're going to be hearing about these topics and a few others from our Director of Business Development for Datto, Michael DePalma. Good morning, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Excited
to jump in here. So my name is Mike DePalma. I'm the Director of Business Development for North America here at Datto. So we are a disaster recovery company based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. So about 40 miles east of Manhattan. Pretty interesting story. I mean, just to set the stage, it's a cool story for any of the entrepreneurs on the webinar today. Our founder started the company when he was 22 back in 2007, building these little backup devices at the time by hand, literally in his parents' basement. Fast forward to Q4 of 2020, we became a publicly traded company. So it's one of those cool kind of basement to billion-dollar stories. We're up over 2,300 employees worldwide, and we protect over an exabyte of data in our 9 data centers. We've got 2 here in the States, 1 in Pennsylvania, 1 out in Utah, but it's one of the largest private data center networks in the world. So we're not using any third party. But that's a little about us. Obviously, if you have any questions about Datto itself, you could ask that after the webinar. But we're going to dive into the conversation at hand right now, and that is really the threats that we're seeing out in the market right now, and the shift in mindset from not just being concerned about your cybersecurity posture, but also your cyber resiliency posture. And I'll take a step back, because when we look at how these guys are getting in, their methodology hasn't drastically changed over the years. For the most part, they are looking for weaknesses within your organization. You want to have all the great technology products in place. And I can tell you, I go out, I'm on the road every week somewhere doing either an industry show or seminar or something like this. And we see a lot of great new vendors into the space. A lot of times these vendors are coming from, governmental agencies. People have broken off or retired from the military and gotten to the security space. And all those technologies are great. But there's not a single technology in the world that's going to look you in the eye and say, this product will 100% make sure that you are not going to be attacked either today or tomorrow. Because again, for the most part, what they're leveraging, what they're relying on when we're talking about these criminals is your people, is human error. And there's no technology that could prevent that. So it really needs to start with the education of your people. You're not going to go and buy a security product per se, a commodity off the shelf and say, hey, now I'm secure. It really is a culture of security, and that's where this idea, this mindset of cyber resiliency comes in. We need to have buy-in from every single person, because believe me, they will find the one weak link. There also has to be these processes in place to make sure that everybody knows what happens if I am breached, if I do see a suspicious email, if I do find out that one of our vendors has been attacked, what do I do? These all need to be part of a formalized process. And I will tell you, and this is no endorsement of cybersecurity insurance, but what I will tell you that the cybersecurity insurance industry is starting to deem a lot of businesses, especially at the small to medium-sized business level, uninsurable, completely uninsurable. They are rewriting their whole underwriting process. They actually, that industry lost money last year. And I could tell you the insurance industry does not like to lose money. So they are reevaluating what that looks like. And I think what's important to note is even if you're not in the market for cyber insurance, which is fine, it should be alarming if you realize through filling out one of these applications that you are uninsurable. There's a reason why the insurance companies want to know that you can check all these boxes off, and they want to know that you understand why those boxes exist. A lot of those questions will go into the processes you have in place, the testing, the reporting, all of those type of things. And so again, it really needs to be a holistic, multi-layered approach. When we look at these stories, and you could pull stories right out of the news. I'm sure if I sent a Google search this morning, I could find a new one. But there was one that popped up last week that I thought kind of highlighted exactly what one of these attacks can look like. And there is a university out in Illinois. It's been around 157 years. They were attacked in December of this past school year. And that was during admissions time. So they had survived COVID to some extent. They had opened up, they took a hit for that. But then right when admissions was coming up, they were hit with ransomware. It took them 3 full months to get back and get all their systems back online. And by the time they did that, it was too late. And they are now closing their doors after 157 years. This is scary. And they're not closing the doors because these criminals came in and stole their student information and sold it on the dark web. No, they just shut down their systems. And in the world we live in right now, it doesn't matter if you're a university, if you're a Fortune 500 company, if you are a small medical office, if you're a one-man nonprofit, all of us have the need to be tied into our technology at all times. That's how business is driven. Thank goodness that's how we got to the point and where we were able to survive the last couple of years, because we were able to connect virtually and all these different types of things. This is the leverage that these criminals have, is that they know if they could seize your systems, even if they're not extracting the data per se, they know that you're going to pay the ransom. This college decided against that. That's the kind of stance of the government, not to pay that, and they paid the ultimate price. Now, the government has always taken the stance that you should not pay the ransom. Ransomware has actually been around for over 30 years. It really started picking up steam over the last decade, and the government has really put a lot of focus on that. And they've said it publicly. I've done a lot of presentations alongside some of those folks from the different governmental agencies. But finally, in 2020, the Treasury Department put out an official statement specific to ransomware. And within that statement, they said that if you pay the ransom, you're actually at risk of violating the law, which is surprising. Paying a ransom in and of itself is not illegal. If somebody came and stole my dog as we're doing this webinar, I could pay that ransom. The reason why ransomware on the cyber security side is different is because a lot of times the folks behind these attacks, they're terrorist organizations. They are enemy nation states. And so by funding the ransom payment, you could inadvertently be funding one of these terrorist organizations, which clearly is a violation of the law. Now, the statement itself doesn't have a lot of teeth to it, because for the most part, they're asking for money in cryptocurrency. 99.99% of the time, it's either going to be, Bitcoin or one of the others. And the reason being is they know that once that money leaves, it's almost impossible to track back to them. So the statement itself isn't going to help catch any of these folks. It's not going to actually help even prevent the attacks from happening. But what it is doing clearly is it's shifting the burden over to you as a business and saying it is your job to protect your data, your client data, your employee data. Because even if you are able to survive one of these attacks, we're going to still come knocking on your door saying, you better show me all the due diligence. Again, back to those processes in place. Show me your incident response plan and show me that you did everything you were supposed to be doing to protect that data. They actually just signed into law a couple of months ago, I think it was back in March, a new requirement that if you do pay the ransom, you have to report that. You have to report that within 24 hours. And so the idea that you're going to just kind of handle this on your own at this point is starting to go out the window. We know from our internal reports only about 25% of these attacks are reported, especially at the small to medium-sized business level. Mostly because, look, if you go and call the FBI and say, hey, I got attacked with ransomware, they want me to pay $10,000, they don't have the resources to go investigate every $10,000 attack. They're looking at $100,000 or more to even kind of open an investigation. They want you to report it because they want to track the trends and they want those statistics. But a lot of folks don't report it just for that. They need to get themselves back up and running, but also it's the hit to your reputation. Businesses do not want to be known as the business in their area or in their industry that is susceptible to some of these attacks. The government is now shining a spotlight on it and says, no, you now have to report that. And now it's becoming more and more clear that this is what the government's stance is in terms of how they're going to combat this. Now, we get a lot of information from third-party studies. We also do our own internal report every single year. I've been with Datto 7 years. I know we've been doing it ever since I've been here because we want our own information. For the most part, the folks that we're working with are on the small to medium-sized business level. There's not as many studies focused on that. Usually they're focused at the large business level when you look at governmental studies, but we get our own statistics. And what we've seen is a couple of trends. What we saw, now these are the studies actually from 2020. We run our report from July 1st to June 30th. So it's 2020 bleeding into 2021. And what we saw was there was a huge uptick in attacks on the healthcare industry. That is just showing how opportunistic these folks are. What industry had more pressure on it over 2020 and 2021 than the healthcare industry? They knew they were going to go attack that because they were going to have a high success rate of getting the payments, because the healthcare industry could not absorb being down for 3 months, whether you're a hospital or whether you're a small medical office. Now, what we're seeing as the numbers are coming in this year is that that shift has actually become the manufacturing industry, because again, what has a lot of pressure on it right now with all the supply chain issues and all the rest is the manufacturing industry. So I'm very confident we get those numbers back, we're going to see a shift in that. But if you take a step back and just look at the numbers and the different industries that are being hit, what you'll see is every single industry is vulnerable, because really the genius behind these ransomware attacks is that they don't really care whether your data is valuable in and of itself, whether it's proprietary data, whether it's financial data. With ransomware, they're just encrypting it for the most part. They're holding it hostage because they know that although the data may not be valuable to them, it's very valuable to you, and you can't operate without access to it. And that's why they're able to cast this huge net, and they're able to not just go after the big fish that you read about in the paper, but also the small businesses. And again, back to that kind of holistic approach, when you start to think about cybersecurity, because that is a hot button topic, every event I go to now talks about cybersecurity. Again, the mindset tends to be, I can go buy a product to prevent all of these attacks. And what we found was the folks that were attacked, 60% of them had some sort of anti-malware filtering in place. A lot of them had endpoint detection. That doesn't mean that shouldn't be part of your overall holistic plan, but it shows you that it needs to be more. There needs to be more in terms of that multi-layered approach. And ultimately, year after year, the biggest impact, going back to the story about the university, is the loss of productivity is the real impact here. It's not the risk that you'll never get your data back. It's the speed in which you can get back into a production environment. And I can remember 2018 going on stage and giving the results of that study and saying, hey, look, the average ransom payment that these businesses are actually paying on the small business side, it's only $4,300, not enough to break the bank. The impact of that attack is 10 times higher, right? $46,000. Look where that number has gone over the last several years. Again, the ransom payment itself is relatively attractive in terms of $5,600 when you compare it to what the average cost of the downtime is, which is $300,000. Now, these numbers, when you talk about average cost, they're a little bit difficult because everybody's so much different in terms of the industry you're in, how transactional you are, all of that. But the numbers I think that are more important, because it allows you to go look internally and say, what would an attack cost us, is the numbers of what's the average length of downtime. I did a presentation last year alongside a gentleman from the Department of Homeland Security. Their stat was the average attack on a small business cost about 16.2 days worth of downtime. Think about that in perspective of what that would cost your business. And then the newer studies that have come out, actually, it's just over 20 days per attack. Now we saw the attack of the college out in Illinois. That was 3 months. I could tell you when the city of Baltimore was hit, it was close to 3 months before all their systems were back up in line. This is really the leverage that they have. This is why it's such a huge impact, and ultimately this is why so many folks pay, especially on the small to medium-sized business community. The city of Baltimore gets hit, and they took about an $18 million hit in terms of what that actual impact was. The city of Baltimore is not going to go out of business, right? They're going to sell off more muni bonds or whatever they have to do. A small business doesn't have that kind of luxury. So they're sitting with the two options of paying this ransom or going to restore my data. And they're going to, that math is going to start right away. And they're going to say, look, it's much easier for us just to pay this ransom. The problem is you're not dealing with honest folks here. It's not like you pay the ransom and you immediately get your data back. Sometimes they will say, thank you for your $5,600 down payment. The next installment is 2 weeks from now, or whatever that's going to be, and then the clock starts ticking. You're not dealing in an honest business transaction here. So we want to make sure that you're in a place where if you are attacked, you can absorb that and you could survive that. Because the scary stat within this is when we talk to the business owners, only about 3 in 10 of them were highly concerned about ransomware, despite the fact that we did see a huge uptick last year. If you were to aggregate all of the cyber attacks and the amount of money that's generated by those cyber attacks, aggregate it into one pool, that would be the 9th largest economy in the world. More money is generated than the country of Canada or the country of Brazil. That's how much money is out there. And they know that their business model is working because, look, 70% of businesses still are not highly concerned. They're going to follow the path of least resistance. They don't have to change anything. There's still so much low-hanging fruit there. And until the business community starts to take this seriously as a whole, it's going to continue to be successful year after successful year. I can tell you, I know when we get those numbers back from 2021, it will have been a very, very good year. So the way we combat this is to shift the mindset of, okay, cybersecurity is extremely important, but how do I make that a more holistic approach and turn the conversation into not just cybersecurity, but cyber resilience? And what that means is, okay, the first step that we're going to do, you could sit on a webinar like this and hopefully learn and hopefully go back and look at some of your systems and figure out, okay, what do I need to do? But nobody could answer the question of what do I need in terms of technology until you spend some time identifying where all your assets live, what that network looks like, who has access to all of that, where critical data lives. That identification process, that exercise is critical. And that should actually go, if you're starting your incident response plan, which again, I highly encourage you have something written out that's defined and everybody in your organization understands. It starts with the identification process. Let's identify where all these assets live, because from there, we can go and put together a plan to try to protect all those assets. And we're going to put a lot of layers in place where we're going to stop the vast majority of these attacks from getting through. But if something was to happen and it was to get through, if somebody were to open the door either inadvertently or unfortunately maliciously from an insider, how quickly are you or whoever's monitoring your IT able to detect that attack has occurred? That is critical, because what these criminals will do to a T is they will get in, and the first thing they're going to try to do is find that backup and impact that backup. And they might lay dormant for a little while before they detonate that alert that says, hey, pay me some ransom. They want to go in there. So detection is critical. And then who is it going in and responding to that threat? How is that machine being isolated? Who's doing the forensics to see what's been stolen, what's been encrypted? And then ultimately, what does that recovery process look like? How quickly are you able to get back up and running into a true production environment, business as usual? We know from the stats that typically right now, that full circle is that lasting anywhere between 16.2 and 20 days. The idea here is, how can you speed that process up so you get back to full production as quickly as possible? The other way to kind of look at it is literally, it's easier to kind of interpret, I think, and the kind of the buzzword in the IT space is right-hand side of the boom. The boom representing this attack. So what's happening on the left-hand side of the boom is this is when you're identifying all of your assets, you're putting protections in place. In the meantime, the criminals are doing their reconnaissance. They're figuring out a little bit about you. We all give so much information freely. You can look me up on LinkedIn right now, find out where I went to school, my previous employers. So now when an email comes out, it's going to look like every other email in my inbox, right? That's the kind of easy information that we all have to basically freely give on the internet in order to survive at this point, right? And then they're going to go weaponize that. They're going to deliver that typically still through a phishing email with an executable attachment or a malicious hyperlink. And then the boom occurs. So when that boom occurs, that's when they're doing all their nefarious acts and going in and installing and trying to get control of all those different systems, and then ultimately asking for some money. In the meantime, what are you doing in terms of how quickly are you detecting that, okay, that boom has occurred? Who's going in and responding to that, and how are we recovering it? This is where the race really begins, is that right-hand side of the boom. And this is the part that the business community really needs to start focusing on, because the vast majority of folks, when I start having these conversations, they tell me about everything they're doing on the left-hand side. They can a lot of times answer that, but okay, what happens if? You really have to be prepared for that. And I mean prepared of knowing the processes of who do I call right away. Time is of the essence as soon as an attack occurs. So, we could sit here and acronym all day long into tech space, but the two that are critical to your cyber resiliency plan, incident response plan, whatever phrase you want to use, are your RPO and your RTO, and they have to be well defined. And I can tell you that if you are filling out one of those cyber insurance applications, they're going to want to know these answers. The RPO is the simple one that everyone should be able to answer to some extent, and that's your recovery point objective. Simply put, how much data are you at risk of losing, and is that an acceptable amount of data? Most businesses will tell you hourly. Some businesses are saying, I could take daily backups and that's fine. I'm not highly transactional. Some need to be more aggressive than that. But understanding what is my recovery point objective, and am I meeting that goal? And ultimately, who's responsible for that? Is that a manual process in terms of my backup? Who's testing those backups? If I do need to restore, who is it that I'm calling? That needs to be defined. That's the first piece of leverage that these criminals have, right? If you're not backing up your data or those backups aren't valid, you really have no other recourse but to pay the ransom or close your doors. But they know for the most part, people are backing up their data. So the focus really is on that right-hand side of the screen, right-hand side of the boom. What is your recovery time objective? How much downtime would you incur if one of these attacks were to happen? Would it be an hour, a day, 16.2 days, 20 days, 3 months? You need to be able to answer that question. What is my RTO goal, and am I meeting that goal? And this is really where that cyber resiliency piece comes into play, because fortunately, technology has evolved. The criminals have evolved on the bad side. The good guys on the tech side have evolved as well. Clearly, think about the products you're using right now compared to what you were using even 5 years ago. I mean, technology used to be pretty simple. You could work with 1 or 2 vendors and get basically everything you wanted. That's clearly not the case anymore. So what backup has evolved to is really the idea of continuity of operations. And what that means is, backup has been taking place since the invention of the computer, right? All back to floppy disks and drives and all the rest. And then ultimately what those backup solutions are doing, they're backing up files and folders, whatever you're telling it to back up. Continuity of operations looks at things a little bit differently. It wants to back up everything. So it's a full snapshot of that server or that critical workstation that captures, yes, all the files and folders, but also the operating systems, the applications. Everything that lives on that server is mirrored over, in the case of Datto, to an on-premise device, and then subsequently to those 2 data centers that I mentioned. So you've got 3 full images of that. Now, what it gives you the ability to do is now you say, okay, what's my RPO goal? My recovery point objective is hourly. Okay, I'm going to set up these hourly backups. And what's happening is it's not taking a full backup of that server every hour. It's just looking at the block level incremental changes that are happening between those 2 points in time. It gives you the ability to create what's called an inverse chain, whereas a lot of these traditional forms of backup are layered upon previous backups. These are all independent instances in time. So I mentioned criminals are going to want to get in and find that backup. You know that this has no risk of impacting previous backups. You get hit at ransomware at 11 o'clock. You could take the time machine back to 10 o'clock. So that alleviates that risk. It also gives the ability on the detection side of things to detect ransomware when it occurs, not by looking at individual variants that are changing by the hour, but instead the footprint that all of these attacks essentially leave. Because as these backups are going along and the incremental changes are being backed up hourly, they look relatively similar. When a ransomware attack occurs and everything is now changed all at once, it's going to trigger an immediate alert. It says, hey, this looks like every other ransomware attack we've seen. Go and start to address this, and here's your last clean backup. But ultimately, what continuity of operation does is it does change the mindset of what happens when an attack occurs. The traditional method is, okay, my server's been attacked. I have to now go shut everything down and go order a new server, or go and try to start the process of wiping that clean. And when that's ready, now I'm going to start restoring all that data. what continuity of operations is saying is their first reaction is not to do that, but say to yourself, I have to get everybody in my office back up and running. So if Jim down the hall clicks on an email he's not supposed to, the first phone call would be over to the folks at LambTech, ideally, and they would spin up what's called a virtual instance of that server. So now everybody that had access to that server that's been encrypted and essentially worthless right now has access to everything that they need off of this. This would be operating as your server. And you're taking active backups within this state. You could be in this state for several hours, days, weeks. Most of the time, if this is happening at the local level, people in the office don't even know that that's occurred. There's been plenty of instances where people are just working business as usual, not knowing that their company has been attacked. And so now when your new server's ready and you're ready to start that restoration, you're getting back to where you were, not when Jim clicked on that malicious email, but instead where you were the moment that that server was ready to start receiving that data. And you can actually start that restoration while you're still in this state. So you're trying to close the downtime both on the front end and the back end, ultimately taking one of these attacks and reducing the downtime from days or weeks or months even to literally minutes or hours to get those systems back up online. Take one of these attacks and turn it into what's essentially an inconvenience as opposed to a true business